Hello, Brobs. I haven't read ghost stories in a while. So I'm going to return to this book, Foxfire 2, where the ghost stories are abundant. Hillbilly ghost stories, but such is life. As you can see, this book's in tatters, but at least it's not a romantic comedy. And we're not at Barnes & Noble's paying $23.50 for a book. Boogers, Witches, and Haints. This is the second part of this segment, even though I've skipped and went to a different ghost story since. Let's go. Lawton Brooks. Bob Meeks was his name, and he was a-working somewhere in Tennessee over there. He comes through by Benton while they didn't have the road then, and he had to come across the mountain. Now, I don't know whether it was Frog Mountain, whether that was the name or not, but anyway, there was 22 mile there, and there wasn't no houses on it, and steep and twisty, my lord. And it was late in the night. His wife had called him. Some of his kids got sick, and he had to come in. And he is coming along up that mountain, and he said he come around the curve, and he seen this thing. Said it is the biggest man he ever saw. The man stepped out of a water ditch by the side of the road, and there's Lawton. And said he just leaned over a little, and as he come by, he just stepped on the running board, reached down, opened the door, got in, sat down, and looked him over. It was a should be an old Model T. It was I can't say it. It was a old Model T. And the way it was going, it didn't make much more time than a man walking. And he said he looked at that thing's hands, and that's what he couldn't figure out. Says its fingers, and one of them was as long as two of his, and if they was put together. And as big again around, he said he had awful big arms, and on top of his hands was just as hairy, plumb on down towards his fingers. His fingers was the longest he'd seen on anybody. Must have been 10 inches long. He said he spoke to him, and he never did speak back. He said he didn't know whether he was gonna do anything to him or not. He said he knowed he was big enough. There wasn't nothing he couldn't have done about it. They wouldn't need no getting scared, because that man could have reached plumb around him one-handed. Big, tall man, all hairy. I guess this is more of a Sasquatch than it is a ghost, but who knows. Said he had a beard way down and face hairy, and said he was a kind of nasty-looking old man. Said he looked as old as the hills. Said he never got around out of him. You could hear him getting his breath. And he said he rode at least 3 miles with him, and he wondered if this thing was going to plumb to Ducktown with him. And he was going around another curve, and said that thing, man, wherever it was, he just stepped out, and he said he looked back, and it is just standing there in the road. Said he was the ungodliest man he ever did see all the days of his life. He said people might not believe him, but he said it is the truth. Now, I believe it, because I don't believe Bob would tell a lie. I wouldn't. He was a man, never got excited about nothing. And after the man got out, Bob said he just kept driving on. And me and Walter Coleman and George went opossum hunting. Now, that's the only thing ever I did that I never found out what it was. Now, I didn't find out what that was. Now, I'll be fair with you. We left, and it sounded like somebody taking a fit. Just like somebody crying, hurting awful bad. And it just commenced when we walked to where a dog treed a possum out in the ridge right on. I'm not reading this story. I'm not reading from this book ever again. Right onto the Hiawassee River. And we just went out there to get a possum, you know. When we went out there, by gosh, we just walked around to the end of this old big log there. Just got a little bit past it, and something commenced. Walter said, Lawton. Walter said, Lawton says, what in the world is that? And I said, I don't know, but I says, ain't that a pitiful noise? That's somebody or something or nothing hurting. So we took our old lantern then and walked around the log, plumb around it, come back to the big old stump there where the tree had been sawed off. We looked at the stump. It wasn't holler. Looked in the end of the log. It wasn't holler. Well, I went up the side of the log with my lantern, shined the light along it, couldn't see no hole in the log on either side of it. It still sounded like somebody crying and moaning under the log. And we started a little way from the log to where it sounded like it was coming from now, and then it sounded like it is right back there at the log. And we never did find out what it was. We left there. We left, old George and Walter and me. We started off that mountain away from all that moaning with nary a possum into a field, old man Smith's field. And we run right into a wire fence that we didn't know was there. Way we went flying when we hit that fence, it scared the daylights out of us. That was the only thing I ever heard. I never did find out what it was. Why? I was scared so bad. But I wasn't going to stay and them boys run off and leave me. They wouldn't stay with me. And I sure wasn't going to stay up there and listen to that thing by myself. So we didn't take time to get any possum. That's sad. Mrs. Mary Carpenter. I've heard Mama tell about the one my daddy saw one time. Said that there was a preacher and there was a forks of a road somewhere near a church, I believe it was, and he said that it was about ever evening, about sundown, that you could go there, and there's a woman that she was so high up in the air that she looked like she was on a quilting frame, just high up, and she had on a long black dress, and she was just walking along, and it rustled like leaves a rattling, as she walked. My daddy and another man, they worked for Earl Hudson at a sawmill. And they said they was coming in one night, and it was a-raining, and they was a-riding them mules on in home. And that man said to my dad, he said, I'd like to see that preacher's ghost tonight, wouldn't you, while it's dark and raining? Said my daddy, said to him, well, yonder she comes. Said they went on, just kept a riding, and Papa said to him, you ride on one side of the road and I'll ride on the other, and let her come between us, and we'll see what she looks like. And so they did. They reined the mules over and let her come right in between them. She said he said to him, let's follow her, see where she's going. See where she's going. Said it was just pouring the rain down. And said they turned the mules around and followed about a half a mile out the road, and said there was just a curve in the road, a little ridge, and said she just riz and flew over that ridge, and they didn't even know where she went. Now, is that the kind of haint tale you want? Well, all right. Now, there's a place down next to my brother's that they've seen things down there on that hill. My husband said they was going out through there one night, him and Lawrence Talley, I believe it was. They'd been to church up here to the flats to a holiness meeting, and they was a going down Mud Creek going back home, and he said they was going up along there, and he said he didn't know what it was. It didn't say a thing in the world, but something just hit them. It was as cold as ice, and he said they just began to shiver and shake. And he said, Lawrence said, are you cold? And he said he was just about to freeze to death, and it was in the summertime. And he said, well, I am too. Says, seems like there's ice all over me. And John said, well, seems the same thing to me. He says, let's run. And John says, I can't run. He said, I don't guess I could either. And said it just jumped off of him just like that, whatever it was, and went away. He said, there's people said they is Haints over there. And there at my brother's right across the creek, you've been over there on Kelly's Creek up there where Jim Taylor lives. There's a Mason woman lives over there. She said she seen a little baby out there that was flying, had wings. And she said it came up out of her garden more than once, and she'd be out there on the back porch up in the evening doing her night work. And she said it would rise up with wings like a little angel, a baby. And I know she's seen something one time because her husband's Frank's daddy lived over on Germany and he was sick, bad sick. And so Frank, he went to see his daddy. They were looking for him to die. And she had a hog pen out in the woods there, out toward our house, and she began to scream. And Mama hollered to me to run over there for something the matter. She may be snake bit. Well, I went a running just as hard as I could, and Dad, he went a running over there, and she fainted for the time we got over there. By the time we brought her to, she said there was a man there at her hog pen with a white shirt on and no head. Blood was all over his white shirt. Grandpa said they moved one time, said Mama was a little girl then, and he said they got moved all but their children, and he had to go back and catch them after dark. So he got him some sacks to put his chickens in and went back to the place he'd moved from and caught his chickens up and tied them and put them in a sack. He was riding a mule. He had some slung across his saddle, some on one side and some on the other. And he was coming along, and all at once there was something in the road. Said it looked like somebody in the moonlight. Said he said, "Whoa," to the mule. Said, "Is anything the matter?" And said it looked like a log. Said it started rolling toward his mule, and his mule started running back ends with him. Said it just rolled so far and stopped, and it rolled back up the road. Said he'd started back up the road with his mule, back up through there, and said he'd come back toward him when he'd start. Said he made 2 or 3 trips like that and decided it wasn't going to get out of the road and let him by. And said the mule were afraid of him, and so he just laid the fence down, a rail fence, and let his mule run through the pasture and come back out, and laid the fence again and passed that place. And Grandpa said one time him and Uncle Dave was going home from a dance, and as they come around there where a pond was, why they heard something saying, "Oh Lordy," taken on pitiful. Grandpa said he was scared and said he was little, and he grabbed Uncle Dave by the coat and said, "Dave, don't you run." He said, I ain't going to. I'm going to stay here. It's rising, whatever it is. It said something come up out of the water with the moon a shining. Said you could see it like a white sheet. Said it had 4 corners. Said it just kept going up, and it was just talking on the pitifulest. Said it was saying, "Oh Lordy." Grandpa said that his mother said that. What caused that? There was a miller there, and he'd killed his wife and put her in there. But that's been many, many years ago. I don't know. It could have been Grandpa. It could have been. Grandpa, I believe, told the truth because I never did know him to tell a wrong. I believe he heard it. I believe there's things for certain people to see. When we lived in that old house right down there, they sure was one down there. Harv Brown owned the place first, and his wife wasn't afraid to stay there. Was afraid to stay there. They was going to sell it, so we bought it, and we could hear a horse down there. Harv was afraid of it, too. At night he'd come, and you could be just as quiet as you want to, but when you blowed the lamp out, back then you didn't have electricity in this part of the country. You could hear that horse, and I mean, it'd come right up in the yard just like a feller. You've heard a feller ride a horse. What a big racket they make. And it'd stand and stomp till you got up and looked. But when you got up to look and shine the light, there wasn't nothing there. You didn't hear any more that night. But it's the truth if I ever told it. If I'm a-sitting in this chair, I've heard it. And Grandpa said one time that he went to make music one time for somebody and said he broke the banjo string. They said, "Well, we'll have to quit. We ain't got another banjo string." One of them said, "John, you run over to Ken Muse's." Said, "He's got some banjo strings, some extra ones." Said, "Get one over there." Said, "It ain't late, and we'll play some more." Said he looked out, said he wasn't afraid, but he didn't like the idea of going, for he had a big dog that'd bite. A great big old dog, and he said, "It's pretty dark out there, and I'm afraid that dog will get me." "No," he said, "I'll make you a board light." There wasn't such a thing as a lantern or a light or a flashlight. Said they got him a pine torch and lit it. He said, "Now if you'll hurry along," he said, that is just a big old pine knot, and they'll just keep a burning and going." Said, "If you won't stay too long and hurry along, it'll last you till you get there and back." And so he did. He started out with his pine knot, and he said he got nearly there, and something just reared up on him and put his hands up on his shoulders and pushed him backwards and blowed his breath in his face. Said he reached like that to push it off and couldn't feel nothing, and said that he plodded on pretty fast till he got over here. And he said to him, he said, "Is your dog loose tonight?" He said, "No, I've got him tied up." He said, "I thought you kept him tied at night," he said. "No, you tell me what that was that reared up and like to push me down out here." And he said, "He is about as big as your dog." He said it was a big thing, and it put his front feet right up on my shoulders and liked to shove me backwards. Now he said it wasn't my dog, John. He said, "Come here, and I'll show you. I chained him tonight." Said he went around the back of the house to his cellar door, and that old big dog was tied up there. Said he never did know what that was, but said something sure pushed him backwards. And said he had the light and could have seen it if it'd been something, but he didn't see no dog. And I know another, and I know one more I'll tell you. Grandpa said that one time they moved the place, and Mama was their baby. The old man, the old man that owned the place lived off in an older house, and his good house, he had it for real. Said, "Why do you reckon the landowner lives in that old house and rents this good one?" Well, he said, "I don't know either, but there's something sort of fishy to it. Maybe he gets more pay for the better house, though." Well, Grandma done the milking. She went to milk that evening, and when she started milking in the bucket, milk in a tin bucket will make a racket right out from a big rock pile, the baby began to cry. Said that Grandma just milked on a little while and said she just took her bucket and went to the house and told Grandpa. She said, "I want you to come out here and listen." She said, "When I go to milking, there's a baby that goes crying in that rock pile." "Why now?" He said, "There ain't." She said, "Come on out here and hear it." She poured her milk out to where it'd make a racket in the bucket, and she went back and she started milking, and the baby commenced to crying again. They talked to the man about it, and he said, "Nah, there wasn't nothing to it." Said, "People just imagine hearing things." And Grandpa, he was a little bit afraid of it. He stayed on a while, just milked and let the baby cry. Said that some of the neighbors around there, they got to talking to him. Said they didn't nobody ever know what become of that man's wife and baby. Said he had a baby and a wife and they just disappeared and nobody ever knowed where they went to. And Grandpa said that he didn't know. But he sort of thought they might be in a rock pile up there. He said, when you go to milking, the baby goes crying out there. A bunch gathered up together out there and they went to milking. And the baby cried. They moved the big piles of rock, dug down there, and he killed his wife and baby and buried them there and piled rocks on them. Grandpa and Grandma, they moved away from there, but that's why that man couldn't live in that house, in the house. I reckon they'd come back to him in a good house there. This book, absolutely falling apart. All right, we'll read one more page. Alex Justice. One night we just wanted to camp out, and we saw Haints all night. Long about 10 o'clock, I guess it was. The wheat mill was down there, and there's old sawmill down there. Somebody come riding a mule up, and somebody come right up to the bridge, We run out there, and it was gone as quick as we got there. Then along about 4 o'clock, there was a yoke of steers come down the road hitched to a sled. They get about as close from here to the porch there. We saw it all. We was just boys. It did scare us. There's a big old white dogs just a-trotting along and a man. He had on a white shirt and didn't have no head. Chains a-rattling. Then it'd go away and then it'd rise up again just a bit down below us. And here it'd come. We'd grab corn stalks and run out there and there wasn't nothing there. Then I saw a sled with a load of wood on it coming down the road, and they wasn't nothing pulling it. I could see the standards on the sled, I could. And once my wife was sick, we had a dead baby and been to bury it that day. There is snow on the ground, and somebody came up on the porch and knocked on the door. And Miss Adams said there ain't nobody there. It just walked up and knocked on the door just as plain as anybody was there, but they wasn't nobody there. She told me, that ain't the first time. Calvin Talley. Back when I was a young boy, I guess I was about 10-year old, I was headed to church one evening and I rode down the highway with my brother. And we got out and I started walking up toward the church, and all of a sudden there was something that come from around the side of this old building, and it was kindly dressed in white. And I couldn't hardly make it out. I had always heard this old building had ghosts, and I couldn't really understand what it was, but it made me pick up speed. Myrtle Lamb. Well, it was up near Sunburst, North Carolina. It was a house nobody wouldn't live in. Everybody would get scared, and you would hear all kinds of rackets. They said a girl had a baby and said she didn't want it, so she took it and fed it to the dogs or hogs, and when it rained on a cloudy night, you could hear the baby cried just as plain. Then in the house, you'd hear all kinds of things like stockings rubbing against the wall. My mother said every night something would come up and kick the cover off her, and she would get up and sit up scared to death. And this other woman got afraid and come and stay with her, and I'd sit and dip or snuff and talk and go on. All right, brovs. That's as much as I can take for one sitting. All right, goodbye.